Welcome to the Orthocast. Today we finally have Dyer, the #1 cringecore singer in the entire multiverse. I'm sure you've heard his songs, Gossiping, Hey Piggy, I'm Married to the Funko Pop. Not only does he do this, he does singing, but he also does a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of theology, a little bit of debate and geopolitics. And I think this is why Jay's got so many haters is, you bring up Dyer and people either love him or they hate him. And, the people who hate him, they just bring up these random lies and they get really triggered. And I think I was trying to find the root of this hatred. And I think it's really the jealousy that Jay can, come on and do like a 5-hour open forum debate, then a theology stream, then a comedy stream, then an interview with a U.S. colonel. And then where they really get triggered is that he comes on and he can sing. So Jay, when did you realize that you were a musical man and that, you were kind of, you can do all of this and yeah.
Well, I don't really think I can sing, but it's fun to act like I can sing. So in a way, it's kind of like when Vaporwave came out, Vaporwave was parodying modern music and how fake and corporate modern music is. That's kind of the point of Vaporwave back whenever that premiered in 2015, 14, whenever that was. And then, so I just kind of, I've always had a comedic bent. I always wanted to be a comedian mainly. That's really what I wanted to do over the years. So for me, it was just kind of like all of this internet stuff was just more and more of my own personality coming out over time. When I first started doing stuff, it was very serious and very academic, and that was only part of my personality. So I think when you do a lot of internet content, the more that you do over the years, you get more and more comfortable kind of just being yourself and letting more elements of yourself come out. So it was just another venue really to just be ridiculous and do comedic stuff. But I don't have any illusions that I can actually really sing. But Jamie's actually one that really encouraged me to do that, because she actually is musically talented and she thinks it's fun to just kind of goof around and make up songs. So that's what it was really about. But in the multiverse, actually in some of the dimensions, that song went to #1.
Oh, wow. Yeah, of course. Anything's possible. But of course, Dyer, I would say, one of the best Orthodox apologists. But I think one of the things that really helps you excel is you have a very specialized education in lots of different fields like philosophy, theology, geopolitics, conspiracies, Hollywood. And you do a really good job of kind of combining these all together. And like, it's kind of like you fine tune and have a really comprehensive worldview. And I think you've been able to make, a lot of good predictions, and you've been vindicated so often on conspiracy theories, on Bitcoin, on Hollywood handlers. Like you were saying this years ago. So, what was kind of like, what kind of came first? Like, I know you were raised Baptist. So was it kind of like you got interested in theology and that led you to philosophy and movies, or like, what was kind of the progression of these interests? Because I think you've done a really good job of kind of combining these all into a worldview.
When I was in high school, I was really into the arts. All my buddies were either musicians or we were all doing acting and comedy and this kind of stuff. So most of my buddies were all movie buffs too. So if you live in a small town, you're kind of what you have access to. So pretty much all we had was the arts. So everybody was either playing guitar or into the arts or doing drugs. I mean, that's pretty much all that people do in small towns. So that was my circles, and we did a lot of years of theater. I'm heterosexual, by the way, so when you hear that I do theater, let me qualify that I do like women, because many people in theater do not like women. But theater was, at least in our area, a lot of fun. It was well connected to like the Nashville arts and all that. So we would do a lot of tournaments in Nashville in terms of duo interpretive improv, single interpretive improv stuff. So I always enjoyed that. And my goal was always to just go into acting. That's what I really wanted to do. And then in high school, I watched a lot of movies that I didn't really understand, but they put the seeds of things into my mind, like conspiracy, I guess you could say. So, I would watch movies like The Godfather, and I would see the Godfather trilogy, and I'd see all these elements of power interacting and organized crime and intelligence agencies, but I didn't really know much about it and have any frame of reference to really make it fit together in a coherent way. I remember watching Mel Gibson's Conspiracy Theory, and that kind of was the first time I'd heard of MK Ultra, because that figures prominently into the plot of that movie. So these ideas kind of stuck in my head, but I
Yeah.
didn't really have anywhere to place them. So what really started making me have a coherent worldview was when I started reading the Bible when I was 18. And I was a goofy evangelical at the time, so I kind of went through some phases of, premillennialism, and I read Left Behind series when I was 18. I was like, oh yeah, it's the end of the world and the rapture and all this kind of stuff. So, but I was new to the Bible, so I didn't know anything, and I decided, well, I want to go and learn, Bible at university. So that ended up not working out because I decided to not stay Baptist. I decided that the more I got into church history, I couldn't be Baptist. So there's kind of like two parallel tracks going on, where on the one hand I was studying Bible and church history, and then on the other hand I was studying. I started reading my first, I guess you could say, quote, conspiracy books when I was 18 or 19 that had to do with the United Nations and Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy and socialism, communism, and kind of like basic entry level John Birch level stuff when I was 18. That was in about 1998, 97, 98. And the two worlds didn't really meet until I got to college and started taking film classes, oddly enough. So I didn't have a whole lot of film classes. I just had a handful that dealt with Hollywood and history, Hollywood and Oliver Stone, Hollywood and literature. And those were some really cool classes that really started making me understand, hey, wait a minute, there's a weird crossover between the way movies tell stories and the way movies do propaganda and the way that Hollywood tells history stories and the way it alters them and frames them. So it just sort of started tumbling into more and more academic stuff. Around that same time, I just watched, kind of some new documentaries that had come out on Google Video at the time. In 2002 or three, I think I started watching Lord Voldemort's documentaries. Jason Burmis's Loose Change came out. And I saw all those right at that same time when I'd only had a rough idea of what the move for global government was from the United Nations and some of the books I'd read when I was 18. But I didn't really know about fake flags and psyops and this kind of stuff. So it just kind of more and more started going down the rabbit hole. And I believed a lot of goofy things at that time when I was like 21, 22. But you have to keep in mind too that that was like when the internet was first starting to get really popular. And so it's not like today where there's all kinds of resources that you can find. I mean, even with the censorship, there's still a lot more resources than you could find in 2003 or four. And I mean, videos wouldn't load. It would suck. Like you just have to, you know what I mean? Like you didn't really watch videos. Like it's really hard to find. Like MP3 files of audio talks were just, brand new. And so those are really hard to find too. But I remember the first thing I saw that really got me going deeper was Lord Voldemort it was actually on a traditional Catholic website in 2004, I think. And he was talking about Skull and Bones, and I'd never heard of Skull and Bones. And so I started reading about that and the history of that. It's the secret society at Yale University, and that's where the intelligence agency, the OSS, comes out of Skull and Bones. So that was my introduction to a lot of that stuff. And then I just, being a bibliophile and at the same time studying these things at university, I just read more and more and more and more and more. So that by the time I was doing, and I had a weird situation where I was working the whole time I was doing my undergrad and grad school. So it took me a really long time to finish college, right? So I would just I had an easy job where I could read all day and then I'd go to class at night. So I did this for like 10 years where basically I just got to read all day long and go to class at night. And that actually allowed me to work through a lot of material over probably from about 2005 to 2015. Basically, all I did was do nonstop reading and research. And so everything kind of coalesced during that same period of undergrad and grad school. And I had a really difficult time at university because they were so liberal, and I was, pretty much a trad Catholic for most of that time period. So I was always arguing with the professors, and it was really hard. And then I had similar problems when I got to grad school because they're even more. They want to make sure that if you don't go along with all of the ideology, they don't want you to get a grad degree. So they'll do everything they can to kind of dissuade you from going into academia. And so for me, it was all fortuitous, or I guess I should say providential, because I've ended up, I think, being able to do a lot more of what I wanted to do and accomplish and have a much better effect than if I'd just been some boring university professor talking to I mean, because you would be basically talking to 30 or 40 people every semester, and that's it.
Yeah.
Or do you want to, reach millions of people, right? So I'm much happier doing what I do now. And I think also just one last point on in terms of like education, I think more and more it's going to move to people doing it their own way online. I think the legacy university system will pass away for many reasons, but the way we're doing it with Richard Grove at Tragedy and Hope, or I should say over at Autonomy University, is that we're just teaching the courses that people really need to know, right? And and doing it ourselves. And I think that model of education is the future, not the mandated brainwashing central state university system.
Yeah. So when you're like exposed to all this information, how did you like filter it all? Especially like because you were kind of like a pioneer, like back like 20 years ago, like looking at MP3 videos. It's like how and reading all these books, how did you find the good information versus the bad information? Because now it's easy. There's a lot more red pilled people. You can go on and it's a lot more accessible. But back in the day, like how did you know? And especially now, I think that's one of your talents is you're able to find good information and then summarize it to other people, whether it be in conspiracy theories or theology, with Tragedy and Hope and, John Meindorf. So yeah, what's your like process for finding, the good source and, back then?
Multiple things. So one thing that helped was just being really copious note taker. So I always took a lot of notes. I always underlined and I would summarize, the relevant pages. For me, being more of a visual, tactile kind of person, it always helped to store the information through that visual means of taking notes. I used to take a lot of like notes in notebooks. I don't do that as much anymore. I just write on the note tab. So that helped a lot. I have just a gift from God, a really pretty good recollection. So I can recall a lot of stuff, even stuff that I read a really long time ago. My recollection is still really, really good, but probably not as good as it was in my 20s. Every now and then I forget things, but thank God it's still pretty sharp. So I can usually remember most references and whatnot. I wouldn't say photographic, but pretty good. That helped. And then also making a lot of mistakes, believing wrong things helped because I got to see, oh, here's where I was, relying on a bad source. Here's where I was doing this or that. The other thing was people might not think about, overlooked thing is footnotes. Like you always pay attention to footnotes because, I would be reading a book and I would see, oh, this author's, continually citing this book. Maybe I should get that one. And so then I would buy that one. And, throughout my 20s, I basically spent all my paycheck on books. I mean, I just, every paycheck, I blow the whole thing on books, which probably wasn't the wisest thing to do in retrospect. But again, I guess providentially it ended up working out because we ended up with a giant library at our house. But and now I can pay the bills. I couldn't pay the bills for a long time. Like I was pretty, I was a broke college person for ever and ever and ever. And there's that old 90s, I think it's a 90s movie with Jeremy Piven called PCU. It's just a stupid comedy, but Jeremy Piven is like the 40-year-old dude who's still at college, still taking classes, still hanging out with the 18-year-olds. That was me basically for a long time. I mean, I wasn't really, I partied some, so I was kind of Jeremy Piven, but I think in that movie he's an idiot. But I don't think I was like the not idiot guy, still going to college and still hanging out with people at age 40. But yeah, so all of those things I think combined to help. And I also had I can't remember if I had one class on advanced research methods that was really good in grad school. And I was also working in the university library for a year, I think, as a research assistant. Mm-hmm. And that actually was useful. I mean, I can't recall like learning anything I didn't already know. I mean, because a lot of that stuff is kind of basic, but I guess it does kind of help you to figure out how to find good sources, how to access a lot of databases and this kind of stuff that I don't know how relevant that is nowadays. But I mean, like it used to be, I think it's still this way because every now and then we have to like get people that are in the university system to get access to certain papers, but like only the universities have access to certain databases.
Oh, okay.
Like JSTOR and there's a whole bunch of them. And so you would use these search engines like LexisNexis to search the academic databases, which is different than just public databases. And so, I was able to access a lot of stuff that was not like top secret, but just academic stuff that most people can't access to. Like if an average person tried to access a lot of papers or whatever, they charge you like 40 or $50 to get the PDF, and most people are not going to do that. So anyway, I mean, so it was a lot of things. It was a lot of mistakes, a lot of taking notes, a lot of classes, a lot of time, a lot of reflection. Meeting a lot of people also helped. Like I've had this, it's been very beneficial to all of the prominent people I've been able to meet. I'm not saying that to name drop, but to say that you get a unique perspective when you meet and talk to and interview people who are very prominent and have a kind of a bird's eye view from high level media or high level government or entertainment. So that's actually another angle too, because you can get an insight from somebody who has seen things that no one else has seen, right? I mean, the average person doesn't see and doesn't know what Colonel Douglas McGregor knows, right?
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? So like that is another angle that is beneficial to research and getting an assessment. You know what I mean? Like whether you love or hate Lord Voldemort, I mean, he's been doing this for 20 plus years, 25 years, and he's seen and met and known, you know, all kinds of high level people too. So you get unique perspectives when you kind of can interact with people at a sort of another tier, I guess you could say, just in terms of fame is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think
all of that helps you become a better researcher.
Yeah. I think your path has been so amazing and providential, really, like you being able to, you know, talk about all these different topics, and you have reached so many people. I mean, people who are just maybe interested in conspiracies, and you've helped them convert to orthodoxy. I mean, even on a micro scale, like most of especially the young people that I talk to, they're like, oh yeah, Jay Dyer, like they all listen to you. So, and I think maybe you were the 40 or 30-year-old graduate school student, but I think that path, it worked out for the betterment of everyone, because, you know, you're able to, you know, speak to young people, you're able to speak to people who are interested in conspiracy theories, interested in geopolitics, and all these things are like relevant for understanding, you know, the current circumstances. And especially like when you talk about, I think you really do a really good job of, like, you know, talking about church history and the, you know, the continuity, but like in the Globalist book series, it's kind of like a satanic continuity. Like you kind of like are reading all this and you're like, they're all kind of saying the same thing. It's kind of like the same evil spirit guiding them.
Yeah, there is. One of the mistakes I made that's relevant to this was in my 20s, and I think this is everybody who's pretty young. This is not a criticism of you, just speaking in general. When I was in my 20s, I was super idealistic. And so I had this like super idealistic trad cat mindset that like, oh, we gotta make sure to figure out a way to restore a monarchy. We got to convert America to trad Catholicism. We got to do this or else, you know, Western civilization die. And then I remember reading Spengler, and I'm not like advocating for Spengler, but one thing he taught me, as well as some other students of Spengler, was that you can't really restore something that has come and gone in history. And I remember reading that, and that really struck me, and it really challenged me, because I kind of had this idea that, and a lot of people who are young and idealistic, like maybe 18, 19, 20, 21, you think that if you just work hard enough and do things the right way and convince everybody of your ideas, then you'll convince everybody to become a tri-cap monarchist, and then we'll restore, you know, some European monarch. It just gets crazy.
Yeah.
And because it's not realistic, right? It's not grounded in reality. And so one thing that happens when you get into your 30s is that you usually get a little more acclimated to the real versus the ideal. And I think that if you think about a 20-year-old and let's say a boomer, right? If a 20-year-old and a boomer were having an argument, the boomer is like the opposite extreme of he's only interested in the practical. That's not practical. You're talking about a bunch of dang theory. I want to know if you're getting a job. Are you going to buy a house, right? And it's like, so he's the opposite extreme of the ideal. Yeah. It's just no interest in the theoretical or the ideal. And then the 20-year-old is totally idealistic, no interest in the practical and the realistic. And so by the time you're in the middle of that like age span of when you get into your 30s, you start to hopefully, I think, harmonize and balance out between idealism and realism. And so one thing that the geopolitical stuff helped me with was more and more learning how the world really works, as opposed to what I idealistically thought it should be, and my plan for it to become some kind of trad cat monarchy or whatever. And I mean, the same thing can happen to an Orthodox person too. Like if
Yeah.
you're an Orthodox dude who's 19, you think you're gonna, recreate Byzantium or something, right? And Spengler had a good point about that. That civilizations have a life cycle: a birth, a growth, a genesis, a growth, an apex, and then a decline. And that's why you never see a new version of an ancient empire. They all fall away, and that's because it doesn't operate in a purely ideal way. And so we have to avoid those kinds of extremes in our worldviews, I think. And so studying a lot of the geopolitical stuff, I think, just helped me understand, actually this world it's corrupt. It operates on the basis of principles that you would read about in crime. A lot of high level scams, a lot of high level organized crime. That's how this world works. And so I'm not trying to be black pill pessimistic, because you can have victories in this world. You can have, more or less just versions of the state and government. But you'll notice, like in a lot of the tradcat circles, for example, theology is second to their political agenda.
Yeah.
And I was that same way when I was in my 20s. And then I realized, actually, this is backwards. Theology comes before geopolitical stuff, even though those things all matter. But yeah, so for me, eventually it just makes more sense that how could you have continuity between all of these plans of the global elite, over 100 plus years, or maybe 150 years? How could there be such a continuity and foresight, in terms of technocracy and people being born in incubators and, computers running everything? People were writing about this in the 1920s and 30s. And here we are 100 years later, and that's the world that's rolling out. And so to me, the best explanation for all this is not that there's just one elite clique of, smoky men in smoky rooms. Yeah. It's the spiritual power that continually tries to reorganize this anti-human agenda.
Yeah.
That has more explanatory power to me than like I really hate it when people do the Masonic idea, like, oh, the Masons have the true lineage and it goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. And they act like because Masonry said it's true, which is, I mean, they lie, right? It's a secret society admittedly lies. Albert Pike says it's necessary to deceive the lower levels of Masonry. So why are we going to listen to, and this is what a lot of people in this conspiracy domain do, is they make the mistake of believing that because they're secret societies, then anything they say must be true. And they'll have this idea, Jesus was actually an initiate of the mysteries. Thomas Aquinas was actually a Freemason. They really say this, right? And so that's just a revision of history that Masons do to try to claim that, all of history is Freemasonic and all the great men of history were actually Freemasons. And it's all baloney, right? So in my view, a better explanation of history, which does give an account to conspiracy or empire as a demonic organizing principle, is the idea of the demonic, not the idea that there's one secret society of invisible men that control history in every society. That's actually, if you read Manly P. Hall's books, that's what he says. He says that he has a name for it. He calls them the invisible hand or something ridiculous like this, right? Like it's something stupid like. And they control all of history, he says, right? Mm-hmm. So this is basically attributing divine providence to the Masons, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. No, so, in other words, this is why it's good to understand that the idea of demons is a much better explanation than what Masons will offer in terms of conspiracy theory or explaining geopolitical. If you take a class on history at the university, you'll talk about these different theories, and I think even sometimes the conspiracy view of history even comes up every now and then, like as an actual academic. It's not like the most prominent theory, obviously, but they'll talk about the great man theory of history. They'll talk about the people's history with that liberal dude Zen or whatever. They'll talk about and I think they'll mention the conspiracy view of history, but. So, and I'm not saying those are all kind of true in differing degrees, but it's not really conspiracy. It's just geopolitics. Geopolitics is power block conspiring against other power blocks. That's it.
Yeah. That's the thing is they say exactly what they're gonna do, and people when you say like, oh, there's talk about the World Economic Forum, they think they have these certain presuppositions about like a centralized world government, but it's like no, it's much more obvious and it's decentralized, and it's just like hard when they like say exactly what they're doing, and but it's like I mean you've talked about it in the past, like they say it's not happening. Oh, it's happening, but it's not a big deal, or it's happening, it's a good thing. Like it always goes down that route.
Yeah, that's just the gaslighting Overton window moving between, oh, it doesn't exist. Oh, well, it exists, but it's not a big deal. Oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, no, actually, it's a good thing now, right? So, well, I thought it didn't exist. You were telling me like 2 years ago it didn't exist, but now it's a good thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I think you hit on a good point is like I feel like orthodoxy is really like the cure to the black pill, because like when I was a trad Catholic, you do kind of have these really ideals like, oh, Pope Pius the 13th is going to come in and bring back the Latin Mass and everything's going to be good. But it's like, you look in church history and the church has always been full of heretics and error, and like orthodoxy has always survived this. Like, even now we have modernists, we have heretics, because that's how it's always been throughout church history. And like what's so strong about orthodoxy is like, despite like Ottoman rule, this communist, like orthodoxy has survived that all. So it's really like there's no reason, like, yes, it is like black pilled in some ways, but we know what happens in the end. And like, I think orthodoxy is really the cure to all of that. Especially coming from like a trad Catholic, is like you really end up putting all your faith in like a man, in the Pope, because he's kind of like replaced God in that church, which is so sad. Versus like being Orthodox, you really have faith in Christ and just your local church. That's just lost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a poor setup if everything hinged on what one guy did, and of course the Roman Catholics think that's like their big like victory. Claim that it's all hinging on him and he's preserved the church and blah 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 blah. He's the rock, and that's why you'll notice that they're always so weak when it comes to the actual examples, right? When we start bringing up the actual historical examples of people who were popes and were heretics, or why does the papacy move to France for 70 plus years and like they have a giant palace in France, and you're telling me that that's not a geopolitical power move when your whole argument is that orthodoxy is controlled by the emperors, ancestral papism, and it's like, you mean papal ancestrism when it moves to France for 70 years and is controlled by French and German monarchs? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's super ahistorical, and that's why geopolitics and history can help enlighten these matters. Because if orthodoxy is not true, then I think what we would see, which is an argument the papists always use for the papacy, right? They would be like, if papacy is not true, then it would have been destroyed 1,000 years ago. It's like, well, if the Orthodox, we could use the same argument, right? If orthodoxy, then the emperors who were iconoclasts or the heretic emperors would have changed the church. They would have been successful.
Exactly. That's what I say. Like, despite like, these trad Catholics, they're like, well, you were ruled by Muslims and communists. Well, it's like, we haven't erred in our liturgy. We haven't messed up our liturgy. We haven't messed up the councils. We haven't canonized like modernist heretics. And it's like,
well, that's ironic because that's the same argument that the pagans were doing against St. Augustine. So when St. Augustine wrote City of God, the purpose of that book is to say that Rome didn't fall because of Christianity. So trad cats are using the very argument the pagans are using against Augustine because Rome fell. And by the way, couldn't we turn that argument on them and say, so if Augustine and the Latin Roman Catholic Church is the true church, then it fell to the barbarians in 400 because it's not blessed by God. I mean, it's just such a stupid argument. And by the way, when Byzantium fell, it was a uniate empire. So does that mean that? I mean, it's just an arbitrary reading of history. And then when you point out the very same principles about, well, how come your church has all these PEDO struggles, right?
Yeah.
And is that a sign of disfavor? No, that's a sign that God is a sign of God's favor because the devil's persecuting us so much. So basically any event can turn into an arbitrary reading to fit their narrative, and that's why it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's like
terrible.
And it's like Rome has been subverted by the Franks. Like right now they're subverted by globalist powers. Like it's like, do you not have self-awareness? Like it's like the Vatican is in line with all of those agendas. But
Well, when I was a Roman Catholic, the reason
yeah,
for that is that, and you know this, like you typically are only referred to Catholic historians.
yeah,
So you're going to get the Catholic reading of all these events, right?
yeah.
And it wasn't until I read historians in other traditions, like Greek historians, Orthodox historians, and even like secular historians, where you start to realize, well, the papal narrative is not actually the case.
Exactly. Yeah. It completely ignores like the first millennium. Like, when I was a Catholic, we just never focused on that. It was always
Yeah,
the
same
second
here.
the second millennium. Like verse.
But Matt, you just assume that it's just default Roman Catholic, right?
Yeah. And honestly, it is kind of like that's another thing that helps like hear the black pill is reading the first millennium is like all of these great saints who were martyred, and they had it like a much worse. Like they lived in like hell world, and they were still optimistic. And even though like everything, there was really bad heresies, there was no single Christian empires. Like they were still like very white pilled and optimistic about the future. So yeah, reading the first millennium is essential for that. But yeah, my next question is, I've already seen a lot of interviews where you've talked about your conversion from, Baptist to Catholic to Orthodox. But my question is, what was the hardest transition? Because I know, especially being raised Baptist, they're very like anti-Catholic. So was that like hard to go from Baptist to Catholic or Catholic to Orthodox? Because even for me, going to Catholic to Orthodox, it's honestly, they're two different religions. Like they're so different. So yeah, what was the hardest transition?
So the hardest was actually because there was there was some minor conversions in there. So I went from Baptist to Reformed,
Yeah.
and so
Wow.
when I was Baptist, I got into Calvinism at a Baptist Bible college, and then I got through Calvinism, I got into Bonson and Van Til, and that actually got me into being a Presbyterian. So I was a hardcore Reformed Calvinist Presbyterian for at least a few years. I mean, I got really into it. I mean, I took classes at Bonson Theological Seminary, which doesn't exist anymore. It used to be called, it was the Southern California Center for Christian Studies, which was kind of Bonson's brainchild. And I took a lot of classes there, I mean, which were full on classes. And a lot of those were good. I mean, I don't hate that time period. But that was the toughest time period because I was in a very hardcore Reformed church. And, between aside from like Orthodoxy, maybe at times Rome, or Reformed are the only people that do church discipline. And so I was very worried about being excommunicated from my Reformed church. And, but I was really grappling with this anxiety of trying to figure out whether Catholicism or Reformed theology was true. And so I kept going back and forth, and I was reading all these books, and the more that I read about Thomism and the more I read about the church fathers, the more I was leaning towards Rome. And at that time, I just didn't really know anything about Orthodoxy. That was like 2002. So, and like in 2002, there were very few Orthodox websites. And I mean, I had one book. I had Timothy Ware's Orthodox Church book, which was just a history book.
Yeah.
So Orthodoxy wasn't anywhere on my radar. I just thought, well, it's between Rome and Reformed. And so when I got the church fathers set, I just started reading the Latin church fathers. So I didn't even have any place for the Orthodox church fathers. I was just like, I guess they're cool, but I'm more interested in Augustine. So I just defaulted to Augustine because for me, Augustine was because the guy that both reformers and Rome looked to, right? So for me, it was like, okay, this debate will be decided by him. And like, what was his actual theology? So I dove in and I read like that, literally thousands and thousands of pages of Augustine. And I was already Presbyterian, but I was still going to a Baptist Bible college, which they really frowned on, because when you go to Baptist Bible college, they want you to go to a Baptist church. And so I got threatened with being kicked out of Bible college because I was going to a PCA church. And that was so I was in this really difficult kind of in between position. And eventually I moved my Presbyterian church membership to a different one. And that guy was more knowledgeable than the pastor that I was under. And so I felt like he could help me out better. So I went there for about a year, and he was a very nice guy, a really, really sweet man. But we got to a certain point where, and he was actually he had studied under Bonson directly for many years. He studied under Bonson I can't remember if Bonson was at Reformed Theological Seminary or Westminster, wherever Bonson was at, but he studied under him and knew him very well. And so I felt like he could be the best help. And it got to a certain point where when I was taking a class at Bonson Seminary, we had to do, it's called ancient, or it was called medieval, patristic and medieval theology. That's what it was. And to give credit to that class, I mean, like we actually had, some full on, like we had to read church fathers, we had to read Cyprian, we had to read Jerome, we had to read Augustine, and then the Middle Ages, we had to read quite a few actual texts. So it was a legit, academic class. It wasn't like, here's my Baptist Billy's, reading a church. It was, we were actually reading medieval people. And so I remember reading Cyprian, and I was like, hey, he's talking about baptism and regeneration. He's talking about the Eucharist. He's talking about bishops. And the same questions with Augustine. And basically all of the Baptist and Presbyterian friends and elders that I looked up to couldn't answer those questions.
Yeah.
And I went to everyone I could think of. I went to all of them. I mean, I even went to like the bigger name dudes, like emailing Doug Wilson and people like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just felt like none of them ever had sufficient answers. And several of them were actually really kind of douchebags about the questions, especially people in the Doug Wilson circles, like Douglas Jones and Doug Wilson were kind of douchey about else. So eventually I just started going to a Catholic. That whole time period was really stressful because I had a girlfriend at the time who was Reformed. Mm-hmm. And she got really upset because I was getting into church fathers, and she thought I was going to end up going Roman Catholic. And I was meeting with local Roman Catholic friends that I'd made at Roman Catholic Catechesis, which is called RCIA.
Yeah.
I made friends with some of the people that were going to RCIA, and so we were reading church fathers together. And I was, constantly interacting with my Baptist and Presbyterian Reformed friends, and it was just super, super difficult struggle because I knew if I chose Roman Catholicism, like I was going to lose all my Reformed friends, and I did. Like they all just like, you're out of here.
Yeah. But
so that was the hardest time. The transitions and changes of mind that I had later on were way easier. I mean, they were still difficult, but they were way easier than that.
Yeah. But that's a big difference I noticed between like the Protestants, well, just Western Christianity, is they focus so much on one single man for their theology. Mm-hmm. Like it's all on Augustine, or the Catholics, it's all on Thomas, versus the East, it's very holistic of like all the fathers. And so, reading, you're like, oh, Cyprian teaches all of these important things, and that led you down that.
Right.
But that's how I kind of was like getting out of Catholicism, is no one could answer my questions. Like I was going to an FSSP parish, asking the people there, and they couldn't even answer if like I'm allowed to go to the Novus Ordo, or if we have to accept Vatican II. Like they wouldn't answer the question. And then I also went to a Melkite church, and I called the priest, and I'm like, why don't you guys recite the Filioque? And he's like, well, it needs to be removed from the creed. And like the Melkite patriarch refused to sign Vatican I. I mean, David's video on, Eastern Catholics refuting Rome is really good. But I like seeing that in person and like going to the parish. And the first thing that happens is the parishioner goes up and it's like, oh yeah, Peter the Rock is the confession of faith. And it's like, it was just really funny, and just felt like Orthodoxy was getting more and more vindicated. And they have all the answers. And then the final straw for me was going to my, I was catechized at a Novus Ordo RCA parish, but then going to the teacher and then just showing him like John Paul II, like, getting the pagan blessing and kissing the Quran. And he's like, oh no, that's a good thing. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, my RCIA teacher. So it's like, they don't have the answers, and they're just like, they're promoting like heresy. And it's like, I know this was wrong. And then like, luckily I was able to, J. Dyer, David, Ubi Petrus, Father Deacon, like they had the answers. And I think, if you're seeking the truth, you will find orthodoxy. But
well, imagine not having anybody out there talking about any of this, and you're trying to resolve these questions just from books. It's like, it's really difficult because I mean, I had a similar situation where I would take these questions to my local priest, and then before I started going to the SSPX, this is what turned me trad. Was I had all this trad books I was buying and reading. I was reading about the Latin Mass and all this stuff. This was 2003, and they sent me to who's supposed to be, I guess, the most academic guy in the whole Memphis diocese at that time.
Yeah,
and he was a really smart guy. But the thing was that he had done his PhD on Anselm and the ontological argument, so that was basically all he knew. Like he knew everything about that, but he didn't know anything about,
Yeah.
patristics or, the papal claims at this point in period in history. And, so he wasn't really equipped to deal with the kinds of questions that you're talking about in terms of ecumenism and Vatican
Yeah.
II. And so then it was like, I just kind of defaulted to being like, well, I mean, I'm just going to go to the Latin Mass because I know that's legit.
Yeah.
And I did find quite a few intelligent people in the SSPX. I don't want to knock. I mean, those people are smart,
Oh yeah.
many of them.
Definitely.
Um, but then it got to a certain point where it's like, okay, so after all these years of reading papal encyclicals and trad books and trad documents and all the trad shelf that I have up there, and Michael Davies and all that stuff, and Christopher Woods and Ferrara and all the Sedevacantists and blah 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 blah. It's like it just like at a certain point you realize that the trad world is just a dead end. So
Mm-hmm.
then it was like, providentially, I think around that same time is when I started having Orthodox friends on Facebook. This is like 2006. And they started throwing ideas out that I'd never considered. And, like, well,
Yeah.
have you actually read, Basil, Maximus? Have you read any of these guys? And I was like, no, not really. So, I had to confront the fact that I just assumed that everybody in the first 1,000 years was Roman Catholic, and I hadn't actually read the Eastern Fathers yet. So
Yeah.
then I realized, I guess I'm gonna have to start reading the Eastern Fathers now.
Yeah. I do want to ask you about like your time, because all of this time has made you an even better apologist. Like, especially since you read like all of Denzinger and the papal encyclicals. Like that was really helpful for me, is just seeing, this is the Catholic dogma, and it's like if I'm gonna be Catholic, I have to accept that you can't be SSPX or Sedevacantists. But then like seeing all the contradictions. So yeah, thanks for doing that research. But so like your time with like being a Calvinist and Bronson, he talks about the transcendental argument, but then you also kind of, found that in the church fathers too. And then you've kind of like fine tuned it into like the best argument for God. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say the transcendental argument proper is there. There's traces of it, but because it's really a development that could only happen after certain later philosophical developments. But I
Yeah.
think the idea, basic principle is there. But I certainly wouldn't say that the full-on, full-fledged transcendental argument
Yeah. No.
itself,
Mhm.
church fathers, but the idea is there. So, and that was something else I struggled with for a long time because um, Van Til always had pretty good critiques of Aquinas, but I could never figure out which was the right way to go because in reality, it turns out both of them were right and both of them were wrong, right? So there
Yeah.
was points that Aquinas had contra Van Til. I mean, obviously he wasn't arguing against Van Til, but like there were things I could find in Aquinas that lined up with the Church Fathers that Van Til got wrong. But then there was things that Van Til critiqued about Aquinas that I thought were pretty solid, and I couldn't figure out how to reply to those. So it wasn't until I got deeper into, really precise people in the Orthodox tradition, like Father Staniloy, that in my mind actually answer the debate, quote unquote, you could say, between Aquinas and Van Til.
Yeah. All right, now I want to shift gears back to the movies, because so like knowing everything you know about movies and Hollywood, like what is your approach of like just watching movies and TV shows now? Because like now it's just like it's so hard. You just notice so much stuff, and for me, it's hard to like enjoy a movie because you're just like, oh, there's that little. You just notice a lot of stuff. Like the only time I'm able to like turn off my mind if it's like a like a 1940s Italian movie or
Yeah,
American.
exactly.
Yeah, like I like watching those because they're wholesome. If there's any propaganda, it's very clear. But now they have this advanced propaganda. So like, do you just watch movies and TVs for fun, or like what do you do with that?
Not really. I
Yeah,
mean, the further that you move up in terms of time period, the worse movies get.
yeah,
So nowadays it's very rare that a movie comes out that I actually enjoy or think is fun or is worth watching. But yeah, I mean, Jamie and I have kind of now defaulted to basically just watching. If we do watch movies, we watch old movies. So we
yeah.
watch stuff 40s and 50s
Mhm.
because, like you said, it's the only propaganda that typically pops up in those is like war propaganda. That's
Yeah.
about it.
Mhm.
There is a lot of war propaganda in 40s and 50s movies, obviously, but yeah, I mean, most TV shows are garbage. Most stuff is just so watered down, formulaic. It's all like sexual propaganda in
Yes.
so many.
It's
So it's almost
Yes.
unwatchable.
No, it's so bad because my parents just watch TV, and I'm like walking in the living room, and literally every time I walk out, there's a sex scene on, and it's like they're like, oh, every time you walk out, but it's just like, why is
Awkward too.
it's
You're
so
you're watching.
I know, and it's like it's yeah. I mean, Hollywood used to have actually like decency laws and blasphemy laws,
Yeah,
but yeah,
exactly. And we could give the Catholics credit for that because
yeah,
the Catholics that pushed that to have the Hayes Code.
yeah. Like I just wish we had that. It's just hard to enjoy anything because of these themes. But so like, when did you start to really hate Marvel and Funko Pops? Because my sister, she loves both of those. She's a Funko Pop collector. So why do you hate these so much?
Well, I mean, I liked comic books when I was 13, and then that's when I quit, right? So I always felt like comic books were a thing you should grow out of
Yeah.
at a certain age. And I have a really close buddy of mine that we've been friends ever since high school, and he's a really excellent professional artist. He actually draws comic books. So I'm not trying to knock him. Like I appreciate his skill and his talent, and he's very admirable in terms of how hard he worked to get to where he is. I mean, he drew all the Game of Thrones, all of the art for Game of Thrones. So, but when I turned 13 or 14, I gave all my comic books to him,
Yeah.
just because he was, always going to pursue this. So I'm not knocking him in the sense of like that's his profession, but he's even mad about how comics have gone in the last 5 years because like it got so woke in 20, probably started around 2013, 14. Comics started going super woke, and he got kind of pushed out because he's like a straight white dude.
Yeah.
I'm serious. Like, so they intentionally started hiring artists on the basis of affirmative action that are not talented. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Which is so weird to me that like, why would you? So just because of affirmative action, you'll hire people that don't have talent. It's just bizarre, but
Yeah.
that's the way it works. And so that's one reason that I don't like that whole domain, because of how people like him were treated, and he's really good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
So it's just weird where you start. It turns into this woke stuff. Turns into this thing where you punish people that are actually talented. It's really bizarre,
yeah.
right? And then Funko Pops. The reason I don't like Funko Pops is, well, obviously because they're just garbage, plastic pieces of trash, right? But
Yeah.
I remember. So it's when I was working at the bookstore in when I left college, I went to work at a giant bookstore that was like a 2-story, really nice bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably 2013, 14, somewhere in there. It was in Cincinnati, and it was an independent retailer that had like 5 kind of big locations. So it was a nice classic bookstore. And that was right when bookstores, people were not reading as much. So they started turning bookstores into bookstore/toy stores. So more and more people were coming in, and they were doing it just to get the market. They were adding manga and toys and Funko Pops.
It's just
I
like
don't know if they don't know if they have Funko Pops yet at that time period, but they started bringing in toys.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I signed up to work at a nice bookstore, like a classic, full on straight up bookstore.
Yeah.
Now half the store is toys.
Yeah. It's like a hot topic now. It's just like
exactly.
That's literally
and
it.
So I just noticed over the year, and I didn't work there that long, but over the years from 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, like more and more of the bookstore got eaten with toys and Funko Pops. It was like a virus eating up the bookstore. And then I noticed simultaneous to that, books were getting eaten up by the comic book section. And then manga ate up the comic book section. And so it's like it's just turning into a giant toy store, which is ridiculous. It's Arrested Development. It's a sign of the end of the world. Decline and collapse of the culture of civilization.
FUNKOPOCALYPSE, dude.
It's a sign of, bookstores are going out of business en masse. So to me, it just represents the collapse of our civilization.
Yeah. And it's just like that is what dominates like pop culture is comic books and just people not being adults. Like even people like sports and stuff. It's like some people, they just obsess about it, and they don't care about like church or anything. They'd rather just be like a kid. It's just
it's all baubles, trinkets, and bread and circuses to distract people from what really matters. They're all control mechanisms, and it doesn't matter how many times you explain this to people. Unfortunately, the majority of people will prefer that to things that really matter, and that's why it's just a symbol of all the things I hate.
Yeah, I think I heard in the past that some comic books are like actually kind of have like a cult. Like I heard like V for Vendetta. They and did you talk about that in the past? Like V for Vendetta. They I don't know.
I mean, Alan Moore
Yeah,
is like the most famous artist probably of all the comic book people. I mean, he did V for Vendetta. He did Watchmen, and yeah, they're all Crowleyan. I mean, he's
yeah,
a devotee of Crowley. So, but I mean, it's not just him. I mean, it's just really popular amongst a lot of the comic book artists, especially in the 2000s. Like they really started getting into ritual magic and the occult because I guess they felt like it would help inspire their artwork or something. I don't know, but I think a lot of people think that by getting into Crowley or the occult, they're being anti-establishment, and they don't realize it's just another version of establishment. So it's
yeah,
kind of just a low-level approach to wanting power. I mean, that's people get into that stuff because they think that it'll give them power. It'll be some kind of
yeah,
shortcut to enlightenment, a shortcut to illumination, and it doesn't do any of that. It's just another angle of the control system.
yeah. All right, so one of my last questions is, what is your plans for the future? I know you were launching that philosophy course, which will be really good, but you're kind of just gonna continue what you're doing, like variety streams of everything. The 5 hour debates, though, like the open forum, I don't know how you do those. Like anyone who's like done a debate, like it is just so mentally draining, especially like all the people that hop on your chat. And then so do you just kind of plan to keep doing what you're doing? Any more like books you want to do, or what are your plans?
Oh yeah, we have a lot of plans. I
Yeah.
mean, I want to put out a book on espionage and spycraft with Mark Hackard.
Yeah.
We want to put out a lecture course like we just did with Richard Grove on. By the way, tonight is the final lecture course in the history of Western philosophy. So that'll be done tonight, and then that'll go up as its own purchasable course, I guess, in the next week or two. So, but I want to do more courses because that's, I think, the future of education. So I want to do a course lecture that's sort of a redone version of the Global Elite book series. I want to do a lecture series on espionage, kind of tying in with the book that I want to do with Mark Hackard. We're going to be doing more live events. We'll be doing one in Austin. We've got, hopefully, if it works out, a couple in-person live debates that we're going to do in 2023. If everything works out, maybe we'll be doing a live debate with both David Gordon and a separate live debate with Tim Gordon as well.
Awesome.
So hopefully we'll have Catholic debates lined up. I don't know if Bryson Gray, he said he wants to do a debate, but I don't know if that'll pan out or not. Hopefully, if everything works out, should be going on Timcast pretty soon. That should be a big show.
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Plan to keep, doing the 4th hour of Lord V if everything works out. If the Austin live event works out good, we'll probably do some more live events in 2023. Those are a lot of fun. What else do we have planned? I think Jamie wants to try to do another book as well on pop culture. I might eventually come back to Esoteric Hollywood 3. It would be good to complete the trilogy for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll do that anytime soon though. I might wait another year or two just to take a break from, if you put out 2 Hollywood books, like then it's like everybody wants to talk about movies, which is fine. I just like to do different things. And so if I do a couple, we did last year we did a philosophy book. All right. So now I want to do something different, right? I want to do a book on geopolitics or espionage. I'd like to do a book on the Global Elite book series book. That would be a good book. So yeah, so we got a lot of things that I want to do in the next coming year. And I just plan to definitely continue doing all the stuff we've been doing. Do some more cringecore music, all of that.
All right, so my very last question is, let's say hypothetically you were given money to make like a movie or TV show. Would you kind of go like the Stanley Kubrick route of making like, Eyes Wide Shut, something like that is kind of like red pilling and awakening to people? Or do you want to make something, like Dune, where it's like this interesting theme of have you ever thought about, making like a movie, like a short film or movie or a book about like a fictional?
Oh yeah, we talked about it all. Yeah, we've talked about how, if we ever get financially, in the position where we could do that, we would probably have to start small with something kind of. I would probably make something kind of weird and independent, like a
Yeah.
weird horror movie, something that's hot sci-fi movie like that that has a message. We'd probably do something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have ideas like all the time for this kind of stuff. I mean, we had a good idea the other day that I thought would be really funny, like a conspiracy theorist reality show where you get a bunch of weirdos living together, and then they pick a conspiracy to um, debunk or vindicate. So
Yeah.
I just thought that was funny to have a bunch of weirdos living in it. So you could have the reality element of people like, having dumb arguments and fighting with each other as they go and try to. I thought that'd be a funny.
Yeah.
I don't know. We have like that all the time, and that would never get made. But yeah, I would love to. Jamie and I talk about all the time about making some kind of story. I don't think I would do like. I thought Man of God. I appreciated the desire, the drive behind Man of God, but I think the kind of movie that I would like to make would be philosophically coherent and meaningful sci-fi or horror or cult movies.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that would be really cool. Well, thanks for coming on today. I think I'd love to have you on in the future. It was a lot of fun, but yeah, I think we'll end it. Thanks. God bless.
All right, thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it.